Spooky greetings to you all. While you probably have heard of the intimidating English Queen Elizabeth I, someone you may not have heard of is her own personal wizard she had employed for a number of years, Dr. Dee. Let's dive in and get to know this mysterious court mage a little more. John Dee, born 13th of July 1527, was an English occultist, astronomer, astrologer, and alchemist. Obviously intelligent and curious, John Dee found himself deeply interested in magic and the occult, and really anything he could experiment with to find out more about the hidden sides of life and indeed the afterlife. Delving deep into magical rituals and divination, Dee was interested in both light and dark energies associated with the spirit world. Indeed, his name itself, Dee, comes from the Welsh du, meaning black. After doing well in the 16th century education system, Dee then travelled around Europe and studied and worked with various mathematicians, feeding his seemingly endless curiosity and desire for knowledge. He returned to England with a large collection of mathematical and astrological instruments, and in 1552 met Gerolamo Cardano, with whom he apparently investigated a gem said to have supposedly magical properties. Being a bit of a rebel ahead of his time, Dee declined a readership in mathematics at Oxford in 1554, disagreeing with the English university's focus on grammar and rhetoric instead of philosophy and science. When Elizabeth became queen in 1558, John Dee became her astrological and scientific advisor. He became a Protestant and even chose her coronation date, so they were obviously quite close already. From the 1550s to the 1570s, Dee became involved in England's voyages intended to discover more of the globe. In fact, he was the first to coin the term the British Empire. Dee's relationship to Elizabeth was that of a confidant and trusted advisor. She truly believed in his ability to prophesize using astrological charts and instruments. One of his first acts for her was to create a chart of how the Queen's reign would play out from the date of her coronation. Elizabeth was said to call him "my philosopher," and obviously held him in high regard. Further on down the line, he turned his focus on contacting the spirit world and delving into the supernatural as a means of acquiring knowledge. Dee didn't have much luck with many people he initially used as scryers or crystal gazers, with many failed attempts to contact the other side. This was, however, until he met one Edward Kelly in 1582. Then going by the name Edward Talbot, his efforts greatly impressed Mr. Dee, and the two began a partnership. They would go about their sessions or spiritual conferences, as they called them, in a very structured and Christian way. Not quite how you might imagine, with a pentagram and black candles, but they would only begin after periods of purification, fasting and prayer. Through these sessions, Dee claimed that he made contact with many entities and angels, with the latter giving him various spiritual knowledge and information. In fact, he wrote many manuscripts supposedly coming straight from these sessions with the angels and spiritual beings. Kelly himself was more interested in alchemy, turning base metals into gold, than the spiritual communication that Dee took so seriously. John Dee had high hopes for what his and Kelly's work could achieve for both England and the entirety of humankind. He believed the messages and information gained from these sessions could help in England's current efforts to explore the world and build a British Empire. They both moved to Poland after being invited by Albert Lasky, and with apparent approval from the angels. They lived a nomadic lifestyle in Poland and Prague, all while continuing these spiritual conferences. Edward Kelly was growing tired of the lengthy and intricate sessions he performed for Dee. and with his increasing interest in alchemy and diminishing interest in Dee's work, the two grew apart. The angels are described by Dee as gifting to him a language known as the Enochian alphabet, or the language of the angels. Some truly believe this to be the oldest language system in the entirety of history, and a powerful tool that can be used to commune with beings from other dimensions and the angels themselves. John Dee used many tools in his communion with spirits, one being a polished black obsidian stone known as a black mirror, which was gazed into and thought to aid in spirit communication. Many of these items can now be found at the British Museum, and exhibits are held sometimes where you can learn more about Dee and see the objects he and Kelly used in their seances. Interestingly, Damon Albarn from the Brit pop band Blur actually has a keen interest in Dr. Dee and his spiritual pursuits. He created an opera named Dr. Dee about Dee's life. It was performed in Manchester during 2011. There are some that doubt all of Dee's findings and the stories found in his many diaries, mostly because Edward Kelly was in fact a criminal, and while most agree that John Dee was not a fraud and willingly tried to fool the public, but that maybe he was taken advantage of by Mr. Kelly, and that Kelly fabricated many of his so-called messages from the other side, being nothing more than a 15th century conman, leeching himself on to the easily fooled. Whether Dee was an intelligent but gullible man taken advantage of by his associate, or a man who stumbled onto a way of genuine strong spiritual interaction and communication, it is no doubt a very interesting tale, and I would highly encourage you to look further into it, as there is a lot more to the subject than I've gone into here, but I didn't want this video to become too long. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.